I want us to cultivate the systems, the habits, the support system to allow us to move in those cycles and rhythms in life. That way, that why, that purpose is able to align so beautifully in your life that you feel at peace, at ease, in love with life by just being you. Welcome to the Open Delta podcast, where we believe that you are here to be more, not do more. I am your host, Aileen, and as a coach, speaker, and consultant, I will help you manifest your dream life that can bring you more power, peace, and cash. If you're ready to dive into the mindset, neuroscience, and connection to the universe, vamos a darle. Welcome to the Open Delta podcast. I am so excited to be your host. My name is Aileen Tapia Hirsch, and this is a very exciting day because the podcast is out into the world. I always want to start with a moment of gratitude, or if I have a guest, to ask them what are they grateful for that day. And one of the reasons being is that a gratitude really puts you in a different level of frequency. And so today I am grateful for all the wonderful things that had to happen for us to be here sharing this space together. I feel very grateful that I know that the words and the wisdom that are meant to be shared with you that are tuning in today are going to come to me. And I also want to honor my grandpa, Tata, which it's a big inspiration for this podcast during a time of grief is where I found a lot of my strength. And because of him, the Open Delta name has always stuck with me. And when I think of the podcast and the creation of it, really the name was the first thing that I knew what it was going to be, Open Delta. When I was growing up, I grew up with my grandparents being very close to my upbringing. I was born in El Paso. My mom was very intentional about giving birth in the US, so me and my brother had different opportunities that she or other family members weren't privy of. And I was raised in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. So I'm a border town girl, beautiful, bicultural border town that I am so grateful that I was able to experience both cultures and go back and forth, which we will share more across the opportunity of this podcast. And the name Open Delta, the reason I say it's inspired by my grandpa, it's because when I was a kid, as many kids play with many different toys, and we throw them and we kick them and we do all sorts of things to toys. And whenever either I would damage a toy or do something to it that needed some sort of repair. At my grandma's house, there were specific seats where people would sit. And if my grandpa was at the table, you knew what his spot was, which was the one closest to the TV. My grandma's spot was closest to the stove because she was primarily the one that always was in the kitchen and helping us be eating and, getting all the wonderful foods that she would cook for us. So I would very intentionally put my broken toy in his spot, even though he wasn't home, because I knew that once he was home, he would eventually get to my toy. And there were some times that he would fix it right away. He had the tools at home. Or B, sometimes he needed to take the toy to the key shop. He owned a key shop. He had been working at that key shop since he was 12 years old. And here he comes, like, Elio and Aileen breaking their toys, and we would always put them on his like specific spot at the table. And whether it was fixed right away or where it was fixed in the next couple of days, I had this sense of knowing that when I put a toy there, it was going to be fixed. Like something good was going to happen. And this notion of you can always do something about it really stuck with me. And so Aileen grows up and Aileen goes to school. We attended school in Mexico for most of my life. Then when I was going into 8th grade, I actually, or the family, me, my brother, and my dad moved to El Paso. And moving to a different country, a different school system, a different environment in 8th grade was horrible. It was a very much culture shock for little Aileen at the time. And volleyball, it's what saved me. I grew up playing volleyball and I tried out for the team because most of those girls had been together since 6th grade and tried out to the team and I made captain that year. So I was very happy that I had a very strong leadership. The coach was great, the team was great, and we were able to, I didn't know all the terminology in English of like serving, spiking, net. I didn't really know how to play the game in English, and it was something beautiful that now I reflect on early on, that sports, and there's a couple of things in life that are universal regardless of what language you speak. It is something that transcends language because we knew how to play and we knew what things we need to communicate better with next time. But the essence of the game I knew, and the essence of the game they knew meshed with my skill set. So it was a beautiful experience for me to recognize that I brought value to a table, that I was worthy, even though I didn't look like them, even though I didn't speak the same language, even though at the time I had a super thick accent. And a very funny story that just came to mind is when my mom, my dad, and my brother went to school with me to enroll me to middle school. And my dad learned English watching Netflix with subtitles. And when the principal of the middle school asked us if we spoke English at home, because if we said yes, they would put me in the regular courses. And if they said no, they were going to put me in ESL, English as a second language. And so my dad, with the thickest accent, it was a very cute interaction that he said, no, of course we speak English at home. Yes, we speak English. And they enrolled me in the regular course schools. However, that meant that I didn't really speak very well. I understood everything. However, that really produced a lot of insecurities in myself. And in one hand, I had my volleyball experience where I was chosen to be team captain, even though I didn't speak the language. But in the regular outings with the kiddos, I was the odd one out because I was a new one and I didn't speak the language the way they expected me to. So I very much felt very insecure about myself. It really opened a lot of traumas in a way. And I felt broken. I felt that there was something wrong with me and that I was the one that was responsible for it at a very young age. So even though I really didn't speak the language, I was very good at math. When I stepped into the classroom, math classroom, I was significantly more advanced than the kiddos my age. big part of it, I believe, is because the Mexican system for math, it's a little bit more advanced at that age than at the US. So I totally crushed my math exams, algebra, whatever I was learning at that age. I was doing very, very well. And why do I bring that up? It's because delta means change over time. We as human, we change over time. And one of the biggest lessons that my grandpa taught me early on was to be open to that change over time. Mind you, my grandpa was not a man of a lot of words. When he spoke, he spoke. He knew when to speak and what to say, but he wasn't, no platicaba mucho. He was very selective with his words. It's the best way that I can describe him. So open delta, being open to change over time, was something that really stuck with me till this day. And that is why the podcast will be called Open Delta. Plus, I love, as you could tell, I'm a proud Latina. My first language is Spanish, and I really wanted something that you could say it in Spanish or English. That is something very, very important to me. So that is where Open Delta comes from, and there will be evolutions of it. I love the tagline of transform from within. I think all the changes that will ever happen will come from yourself. There are going to be people who influence you, who make you see different perspectives, but at the end of the day, you are the one who are choosing to do the other thing or think the new thing or to go pursue the other creative adventure. But you cannot change someone if they have decided that they don't want to do that. They have to decide that for themselves or even decide that they're open to a new idea. So transform from within, to me, goes hand in hand with Open Delta. And 3 pillars that I want to share or embody throughout the podcast, whether it's a solo episode or whether I have a guest on the pod, are leadership and this idea of like cultural intelligence. We know that the IQ measures, intelligence. Emotional intelligence is something that, of course, is very spoken from a leadership perspective. However, I have not seen a lot of people talk about cultural intelligence, whether it's in relationships, whether with yourself or someone else, or in the workplace. And so I want to have a focus on, that conscious leadership about embracing cultural pride, the heritage that we bring to the table, with the key component of not having to explain yourself. I think that having to sit down and explain someone a part of yourself to someone that hasn't experienced that, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I want this podcast to be a platform where you don't have to explain those parts of yourself because I know it, or the people who are part of this community know it. It involves learning and relearning the communication, strengths, empathy, to inspire others through authentic and inclusive leadership. I think this is a very important characteristic to not only empower yourselves, but also uplift those around you with their potential by collaboration, community, and growth. And when I write down the Open Delta name, I also add Open Delta Co., which primarily people use it as, Open Delta Company or something company. But I really want to tap into that CO to be what you need. Sometimes you need community. Sometimes you need collectingness. Sometimes you need congruency. Sometimes you need coexistence. So what is that CO that you need at the moment? It's what I also want to incorporate into the podcast. The second one, I think it's something that it's ever evolving. Open delta, open to change. It's our purpose and our identity. These two are intertwined with our rich cultural background and our strong family ties. And to me, it means understanding and embracing our roots, our values, our traditions without having to compromise our personal and professional goals. I think a lot of times we tie our identity of I want to be a good daughter or I want to be a good wife or girlfriend, whatever that is, and we tie too much of our self-concept of our identity to that. And sometimes I think I've made mistakes in the past of giving that too much power over my own personal or professional goals. So I want us to, in a way, connect back to that deep-seated desire to honor our past generations, honor our grandparents, honor our ancestors, and also allowing ourselves to pave the way for our kids, our grandkids, the future generations if kids are not in your agenda. But really reflecting, living a life of authenticity, resilience, and a sense of belonging. Because a lot of the times, I think we go through different seasons in life. We are trying to break away from a specific pattern, a specific cycle. And there are so many limiting beliefs, negative emotions that might come up. And honestly, I think shame and fear of failure are my top two things, to call them something, are the top two things that have held me back in starting new projects and finally launching the podcast, things like that. And a lot of the times, because we don't express those, I think if we were a little bit more vulnerable to share those things out, we will find actually more points of connections with other people and a bigger sense of belonging, even though those are quote unquote not, healthy emotions or whatever people call them nowadays. But I think those emotions are just evoking, and this is a lot of what I think I will talk into a podcast of, what are those emotions trying to tell you? They're there for a reason, and a lot of the times we want to ignore them. We put them out into a space in our mind of like, I will deal with you later, and they will come back and we will talk about that. And then the third item that would be a pillar of the podcast is energy. I've been through my own spirituality journey, connecting to the bigger, more passionate spirit that has been waiting inside of you to be shared with the world. And I want us to connect with this dynamic energy to really overcome our challenges, celebrate our successes, and inspire others by developing awareness, creating some space for the universe to come and surprise us, for us to be more comfortable with the unknown, whether it's the universe, source, God, whatever you call it. I want you to connect more deeply, more joyfully with yourself, and allow that spirit to come into you for you to produzca los frutos that are meant to be carried by you. So one quote that has been on my mind ever since I started doing my brainstorm for the podcast, talking to different people in a way, because personal development is, very personal. But from talking to people and from my experience with different clients, there is this duality of I want to pursue my goals, I want to pursue my ambitions, but I no quiero, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to disappoint so and so. That so and so could be a lot of people from different people. However, one thing that comes to mind is that you're always manifesting. And you're not always manifesting what you want, but you're always manifesting. And so when you are creating from a place of fear, because you are fearing what so and so it's going to say, you are probably manifesting the opposite result of what you actually want. And so what can we do? What are some of the practices to identify exactly what it is that you want to manifest? For what intentions? What will you achieve? And how will you know it has been achieved? Are some of the questions that are going to be coming back to this topic. I also want to say my overall intention for this podcast is for this to be an experiment. We will see where this experiment leads us to. And I'm going to be honest, one of the reasons why I want to say this, to me, it's an elephant in the room. Because I've been working on my perfectionism for a very, very long time. And I think that is one of the things that has held me back in the past. That I was trying to have everything perfect. The perfect microphone, the perfect setup, all of those things that have stopped me to actually just getting into the creative flow and going for it. So this is me working on my perfectionism. Welcome! And we are going to be releasing episodes every week. Like I mentioned before, we're going to have podcast guests. So if you're thinking of anyone, feel free to send them my way. And some of the topics are going to be solo episodes, but the point of it is striving forward, figuring out what works, figuring out what doesn't work. And that is my intention for that podcast from a personal level. From some of the intentions that I have for the listeners that tune in, everyone that's listening this, whether it's on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcast, it's 5 main things. My intention is for you to find the most congruency that you can ever have so you can be happy with yourself. I want you that by the end of the conversations or by the progression of this podcast, for you to know who you are, for you to trust your gut, for you to know your path, for you to know how to fill the void. And lastly, for you to be aligned with your why. One of the things that I struggle with is when people say, I want to find my purpose. I want to, find my passion, as if it's this one golden egg or Willy Wonka chocolate that you're going to find it and that's it. As someone in her 20s, I think that passion, that why changes a little bit and how it shows up in your life. And so more than anything, I want us to cultivate the systems, the habits, the support system to allow us to move in those cycles and rhythms in life, that way, that why, that purpose is able to align so beautifully in your life that you feel at peace, at ease, in love with life by just being you. Because ultimately, I think a lot of us have been pursuing the wrong people, the wrong places, the right things. And I really want to go back to childhood me, where I like dancing to Tatiana, cantando Tatiana, being so weird and happy at the same time. I want us, for all of us, to be like that. So this podcast is a way of knowledge must precede experiment. And this is me experimenting and at the same time sharing knowledge. And so I want to honor a couple people in this moment. I believe that there's this Hawaiian saying that says, your lineage is chanting through you. And when I learned those words, we were actually learning how to chant. We were learning how to chant Hawaiian words, Hawaiian, they're like poems and they're stories. And that's what I want for this podcast to be, for us to be exchanging those stories that hold so much power. And I'll start with my grandma. My grandma has so much knowledge that mi abuela Mimi, most of the nietos, most of the grandchildren call her Mimi, and I call her Bellota because I didn't want to call her what everyone calls her. I wanted to call her something different. And Bellota actually translates to acorn in English. I honestly don't know where we landed on that word, and for years she resisted to be called Bellota, and now she truly embraces it, and she has so much wisdom within her. And I also wanted a way to democratize all of the things that she taught me from very, very early on, because I do think some of her teachings come from pure consciousness. She didn't go to school. She didn't go to college. When she moved to Juarez, she married my grandpa very early on, and she created 4 beautiful kids. And my mom is the baby of the group, and I am the baby of my mama. So I want to honor my lineage. Tata, who opened locks for a living. He was opening doors for so many families all around Ciudad Juarez. My grandma, for her beautiful wisdom and how she's able to eloquently put that into words. Mi papa Chava is my great grandpa, and he was a politician in Mexico at some point, and he was so mission oriented. Mi papa Lupe, another great grandpa, he left the south of Mexico and his entire family to go to Delicias, where my dad was born, and he became a farmer. Mexican government was giving subsidies and help for people to be farmers in that specific part of Mexico, and he did. He invited a bunch of his family members, and they said no, and he still went. So I want this space to create a sense of cultural and psychological safety for us to heal together, learn from one another, and really connect with our spirit. When the idea came back to me from 2020 that Rocky and I were discussing starting a podcast to really share our low income first gen stories with our community. I was so motivated and I was so excited, and we didn't do the podcast. So when the idea came back to me again of it's time to do the podcast, I've been struggling probably for most of my adulthood on asking for help. And I know I'm not alone with that. I've been struggling on asking for help, and if you know Rocky, you know how driven and outspoken he is. And during our wedding, it was one of the beautiful things about our wedding, other than marrying the love of my life, was bringing so many people that you love together into one place and bringing them together and reconnecting some old relationships that honestly I just hadn't prioritized at the time. And those relationships were my cousins. So when the idea of the podcast came to me, I texted Alfredo and Alberto. They're the cousins of my oldest tío. And I texted them, hey, do you guys know anything about starting a podcast? And they both responded right away. Yes, what do you need? And I said, how do you start a podcast? Like, what are the first couple steps that you need to do? And Alfredo was like, well, I could help you with the hardware. Alberto's very much experienced with the software things. And I hesitated when I clicked send that message, and then A, texting me back so quickly, B, being so incredibly supportive. Then Alberto called me and he was like, what are you thinking? What's the structure? How many episodes? Like all the questions from a strategy perspective. And I felt so loved and supported that when I was talking about that sense of belonging, I don't want to say I missed out in all those years with them, because I truly believe everything happens for a reason. And I think developing a closer relationship with them, because we got reunited essentially at the wedding, was a beautiful gift. Not only was the union with Rocky and all the love that we have for each other, but really rekindling some of the other relationships that will then also be part of our own marriage. At this time, Alberto and Alfredo have already come visited to us in Chicago. And so I just, more than a podcast, more than a platform, this has been the expression of love that I very much feel very grateful that I'm able to experience. One of the things that I told Rocky earlier this week too was about a quote that I read on the internet about, imagine you're talking to your 90-year-old self and think about the thing that they would like to do but they no longer can, and do that. And when I think of what will 90-year-old Aileen would do or would like to do, I don't want her to think I would have really enjoyed to have had a podcast. And I have now the opportunity to do that and not have done it. Another thing that I would like to mention is that I'm also working on not saying a couple of things. For example, I am trying not to say but as much. When you say but in a sentence, unconsciously it negates all the anything you had said previously to the but. To the brain, it just like negates, and it only keeps essentially what you said after the but. So but, I want it not to be in my vocabulary. And the other one that I'm working on is, long story short, and then saying the story. I think now that I am embarking on this podcaster persona, all stories are meant to be told. All stories have value. All stories need a space to live and shine through. So if you catch me, please leave me a comment. Long story short, I think all stories are beautiful, and I am embracing this new era of me as well, of being a better storyteller, being a better interviewer, and I'm excited for where this journey will take us. There are a lot of parts of the story of who we are becoming every single day that I think it's incredibly powerful for us to think about our human potential of a belief system, and what has ultimately led me to the things that I have been doing has been my curiosity. So I want you to follow your curiosity, because there has been points in my life where I have been the most, let's say, broken, the most in distraught, the most confused, and the most lost. That those stories are the ones that have led me to feel that I've hit rock bottom and that I needed to make a change. For example, when it actually happened during COVID, that I had moved out of El Paso. I had a job in Houston, so I was living in Houston. I was having a hard time in my relationship with my dad, and it had honestly gotten so bad that I was getting physically sick. So we will get more in details, but we have 4 bodies. We have our spiritual body, then we have our emotional body, then we have our mental body, and then we have our physical body. So we are always essentially connected to spirit, but it's either the mental or the emotional body that gets clogged up like gutters in your home. And if you don't consistently do maintenance, eventually there's some problems. And where those problems really manifest for whenever it's like SOS help, is in your physical body. And so I had so many bottled up emotions, and I had such a negative mindset around the relationship with my dad that I was just getting sick. I eventually went to a doctor, and this was a medical doctor, and he also is very tuned in into holistic approaches and is able to guide people through other more, I guess more like spiritual practices as well. And so he gave me some medicine. He also told me that I should go to therapy and that I should consider doing some things differently around my dad. And so that's when I started going to therapy. I had to do a lot of inner child work. It was really coming from an wounded inner child that all of those things were manifesting and into my body. And what I just wanted is not to be sick. And had a long conversation with my dad also, and I made the decision to go no contact with him until I got better. And honestly, that has been one of the hardest decisions that I've ever made in my life, because I grew up my dad being my superhero. I was daddy's girl when I started my full-time job. Like, I will call him every day and tell him about what I did, what I learned, and it was a very hard decision that I had to write a letter because I didn't want to be in my emotions and say something that I didn't mean, or say it in not the right context or approach. And so I had to write everything down, and I had to say it word by word. And I'm glad I did, because I couldn't stop crying. And going through that readjustment of family roles with my dad was a 2 to 3 year process. And I know that our community sometimes has the luxury of having very good relationships with our parents, but there's sometimes that we have to do some healing through our parental relationship. So it took very intentional healing, going through therapy, to really understand how can I continue having a relationship with my dad that it's on my own terms, that I'm setting boundaries, and that it's healthy. And to give you just a little bit more context about that relationship, it was all around I was being the mother of the relationship, and he was like a kid. We had totally inverse roles in our relationship, and so it was all the undoing for us to come back to, you are the father and I am the daughter. And so last month, Rocky and I spent some time down in Tulum, where my brother lives, and my dad was also there. And I feel very proud of the relationship that we now have, because it took work. It took years of work. And now, by having healed that relationship with my father, healing that relationship with that masculine energy, I know I'm able to have a more fruitful and loving relationship also with Rocky. And even though at times I feel that we feel broken and we feel confused, one thought came to my mind when I was thinking of this podcast episode, and it was about being a disco ball. Disco balls, and I had to look it up. The disco ball comes from the disco era, right? But it was primarily known for how free everyone will express themselves. It was like very much a freedom era. And it was just perfect for me in the sense, like, I want us to feel free to express ourselves. I want us to feel free to pursue our goals. I want us to feel free of saying what we want when it comes from like good intentions. I want us to be free to do and be what we want to be, because ultimately that is how we are at our utmost highest frequency. And that is how we tune in with the abundance. That is how we tune in with the creativity. And that is how we manifest out of love and grace and fun. And what goodness can come out of that? A lot. And when I am type of girl that thinks that everything's a metaphor, everything's a sign. And when I was looking about, I am so obsessed right now with this disco ball theme. And the metaphor that came was it's a powerful reminder of our interconnectedness and the importance of embracing different perspectives. And our brokenness coming together to make something spectacular, it was just such a fascinating imagery for me, because when you look at a disco ball, it's made up of a lot of different squares, and you can just look at a disco ball and it's beautiful. And why is it that not all the time we look at ourselves and we think, oh, this disco ball is beautiful? It's made up out of all these different things that are just working together to make this one disco ball whole, which it's our nature to be whole and be one and be united. And when is it that the disco ball is the most fun, the most entertainment? It's when light is shining on the disco ball and then it's reflecting its beauty and everyone's having fun at the dance floor. And so this idea of the disco ball at its peak of diversión, having fun, enjoyment, fulfillment, it's when it's shining a light on it. So when I internalized this, I'm like, we all have been disco balls all of our lives. Different parts of our lives we like, some of them we don't. But really, when we're in that full expression, it's when we're shining the light on ourselves. And that means whether it's showing up on social media, whether that is showing up for your parents, whether that is, standing up for someone at work. I think that embracing that disco ball, different perspective, different identities, and shining a light on all of it that makes you beautiful. I think that brings me an immense amount of peace, of drive to do this work for you to find that congruency in yourself. Because transform from within, what we spoke to about in the beginning of the podcast, it's a lot of internal work. So I want this to be the place that you sometimes come with a notebook, with an open mind, an open heart, for you to really transform from within, for you to recognize that the disco ball, it's as beautiful as your soul, and for you to value, and when you have a light shining on that disco ball, it's making everything fun, everything peaceful, everything worthwhile. That is truly what I want out of this podcast. And a closing tradition that we're also introducing is, I want to leave you with a quote. And the Motivation Manifesto, I'm showing it on screen for those who are watching the YouTube channel. The Motivation Manifesto, 9 declarations to claim your personal power. It's one of my favorite books by Brendan Burchard. And mi tío Efraín gave this to me. And he said, Aileen, te quiero mucho y espero que seas muy feliz. Este libro me encantó y espero que te guste y te ayude a entender el propósito de tu vida y que todos tus más profundos deseos se cumplan. And here, my friends, I think this is one of my wishes as I speak in front of you. And I literally just opened the book. I have a bunch of post-its on this one. This is a little bit of a longer quote. And it's actually a question at the end. But we're going to read it. But freedom and greatness belong to those who master their day. They have an entirely different level of control over the agenda and direction of their life. Their days mean something to them because they know each day gathers force toward a particular destiny. It's though they imagine themselves standing before their Creator at the end of their lives and having to answer His questions. His questions are, did you use the time I gifted you each day to be a purposeful being? Did you follow your own path and make your time count? How faithfully did you tend to the dream I sowed into your soul? Ah, how faithfully did you tend to the dream I sowed in your soul? I don't know how more iconic, perfect, ideal this quote is. Because what is it that I want you to be? Know who you are, trust your gut, know your path, feel the void, and be with your why. It's because I want you to faithfully tend to your dream that the Creator has sowed in your soul. That is the point of this podcast. And I want you to write me your questions. What are you struggling with? What do you want to talk about? Because this is something that I've started, but this is for us. This is for you. And so I'm excited for us to continue this conversation. I'm excited for you to keep thinking about what is that dream that you've been thinking about? That idea that came to your mind when you were taking a shower, when you were falling asleep. Because that is the Creator nudging on you for you to pursue that goal. So I'll see you next time. I'll see you Wednesday. Before we leave, I asked my grandma she always sends me la palabra diaria, so a daily prayer. I asked her if she could send it to me, so I'll just quickly play it.
Reconozco el valor de cada persona en el planeta y creo que todos merecen vivir en paz y armonía. Honro la divinidad en cada individuo que encuentro y reconozco el espíritu de amor que vive en cada corazón.
And with that, my friends, thank you for being here. Please subscribe, leave us a review, send me your questions. I am so excited for starting this journey, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.